What drew you to study international relations and the role of violence and small arms in particular?
The first one is easy. I grew up in Western Canada, a long ways from anywhere, and from probably my early teen years, I had an itch and a curiosity to see the world. International relations is not necessarily the best way to do that, but it certainly allowed me to visit more than 50 countries and meet fascinating people, and I think that was my drive, was to get out and see the world. In terms of violence and small arms, that's a bit more circumstantial, and I think the work that I've done on small arms was a product of being at the right place at the right time, having done work on arms control and proliferation for many years. But when that issue became important on the international agenda around 2000, I was there, and I and a number of other people could work with some governments to develop an entire program of sort of research and analysis on this, and I'm quite proud we've still going 15 years later.
What was your experience of being a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford?
Well, it was of course a wonderful experience and a wonderful time. I met a lot of people from radically different backgrounds, and I think that's one of the hallmarks of the Oxford experience, not just the Rhodes experience, was that you will have the challenge of explaining and discussing your work with people from very different backgrounds, from very different disciplines, and this idea of a sort of intellectual melting pot, I think, is a very fruitful one for creative thought.
You are originally from Canada, and you studied in the UK, and you have worked in Switzerland since 1994. Did you experience any culture shock when moving between these countries?
The first encounter that anyone has with a new culture is a bit of a shock, and there's no doubt that although England and Canada share a language, there are many differences. Probably, though, the deepest culture shock I had was when I started traveling in continental Europe, and I realized very quickly that being in the UK was not being in Europe, neither from the point of view of the British nor from the point of view of the Europeans. From North America, it looked very similar, but of course the tremendous diversity strikes you, and there are moments when you really are lost, like literally you have no sort of reference points for what's happening around you, the way people are interacting. And that, I think, gave me at least one healthy lesson, which is stop, look, listen, and then ask questions, because that's how you will figure out what's going on. If you retreat back into your shell, then you can live in a bubble anywhere, but the shock is a productive shock.
Productive shock.
I think so.
Yeah, anything productive could be good.
As long as it's not so powerful that it overwhelms you. Yeah.
Do you agree with the ethos of the famous pop song, War? What is it good for? Absolutely nothing. Or do you think that war is natural and necessary?
I'm going to take a middle ground on this. I think that a colleague in London wrote a very good article, and he said civil war is not a stupid thing, meaning that you have to understand that some people benefit and some people take up arms for particular reasons, and we may decide these are good or bad reasons, but they're justifications, and there's always winners from them. I had an economist colleague as well who said, well, of course war is very costly in human and social and economic terms, but do we want to add up the costs of the French Revolution against the benefits that it may have brought to humanity? And what would the choice be? So not all wars are bad or stupid things. That being said, the majority of them probably are, and there's got to be a better way to solve conflicts than violence.
What do you think of Thomas Friedman's golden arches theory of conflict prevention?
I think he meant that partly in jest, that no two countries that have McDonald's fight wars against each other. It was probably proven wrong in Serbia in the late 1990s. But he was making a bigger point, which is does capitalism bring peace? Because there are people who argue that democracies don't fight wars with each other, and I think he was stressing the economic aspects. Again, any unicausal explanation is very limited, and it's probably true that market economies, which have rule of law and systems for resolving conflicts within them and between them, it's probably true that they are less likely to fight wars. But to say that all capitalist countries aren't going to get engaged in violent conflict is clearly wrong, and perhaps they're more effective at fighting wars when they do.
My final question is, do you think we'll ever live in societies free of violence? Can world peace be achieved?
Well, those are two different questions. I would say that for the vast majority of people living in the advanced industrial world, it's incredibly peaceful. We have no exposure on a daily basis to the kinds of violence that were widespread 100 or 200 years ago. And we take that for granted when we go elsewhere, and we're surprised that people live in circumstances that have really high levels of everyday insecurity, whether it's carjacking in South America or kidnapping of middle-class kids in Mexico City or elsewhere. And so there's a lot to be done to reduce the sort of overall level of violence. But people are much less exposed to it than before. The question of war, no, I don't think war will disappear. It's very hard to imagine a world in which there's such overwhelmingly large military arsenals around the world and people who stand to gain from using them that will never use them. So I think war will break out. My only hope is that it's not large and destructive as it was in the 20th century.
Okay, thank you very much for being with us, Voices from Oxford. Thank you.
Thank you.